This is Power Athlete Radio. With your hosts, Denny K, Professor Booty, and the Luke Summers. And now, toes forward, hips locked, shoulders set, and retract those scapulars. It's time for some knowledge bombs.
Joining us.
My pleasure. It's a retreat to my youth.
So tell us exactly where you are and what time it is.
I'm in Nemea, Greece, which is an ancient Panhellenic game site. It is now 8:19 in the evening. The sun is long down. The lights in the village are up. The town of ancient Nemea has about 250 inhabitants, but it has a temple with now 9 columns. When John was with me, I think there were only 3 or 4. And no, there were only 3. We put those up. It has an ancient stadium where athletes ran and competed in the games, and a museum, and it's my home now.
Fantastic. I'm going to let John give a little introduction as to how he got you on the podcast and you guys' history together and why he was so compelled to get you on this podcast.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. So for those of you guys listening, this is Professor Stephen Miller. He was one of my college professors at UC Berkeley. I took his introduction. It was kind of an introduction to ancient athletics class, which was recommended to me by our academic advisors as not only an excellent class to take, but also something that fulfilled kind of different avenues. As a young student athlete, they try to give you a nice, diverse offering of classes, and his class was one of the main ones in there. So I ended up taking his ancient athletics class and realized that, typical of Berkeley, you're sitting there listening to not only knowledgeable people, but actually the people who did the research. And that was the one thing that really struck me about going to Berkeley, is I could go to a class and not just hear information about somebody else, but actually hear it from the people that not only did the research, came up with the information, created the entire course. So in terms of ancient athletics, Professor Miller is probably the foremost expert in the world in not only the Olympics in terms of antiquity and what's going on. So it was a really fascinating class. Professor Miller and I became friends as a young football player, and obviously soon-to-be professional athlete. And he ended up recommending that I take his History of Roman Monuments class, which was an upper division class, which I took. And we were joking earlier about how it was. I would rank it up there as one of the most difficult classes I took because it was purely based on retention. It was looking at slides, being able to understand the slides, and go back and give a history of it. So we'll post up some information. But if you guys go back and do some research on Professor Miller, you'll see that. What was it? I think in the 70s you actually went to Greece and excavated the original site at Nemea.
Since 73, I've been here at Nemea working on the site and digging the stadium and other buildings and monuments that have to do with ancient games.
If we can go back just a little bit, I'm curious as to how you first became interested in that field.
In archaeology?
Yeah, in archaeology, and then the research that you found yourself in with Nemea.
Dumb luck. It was not something I had planned. When I was 18 years old, I didn't know how to spell archaeology. And there came to the college where I was a student, a Greek archaeologist who was digging in Greece, and he spent 2 days there and lectured to us and told us what he was doing and how he was doing it. And by chance, I was studying ancient Greek at the time, which was the foundation, which is a very important foundation for classical archaeology. And so I was ready to move on into that, but it was several years before I got to Greece, several years before I realized that this was really what I wanted to do. but it was right, and I was very lucky to find what I wanted to do early enough so that it worked out. And then I was also lucky because Berkeley came to me in 1971 and said that it wanted to dig at Nemea, and would I be willing and interested in going to Berkeley as a faculty member to teach half of the year and to take students to Nemea the other half of the year to excavate. I had wanted to dig the Palace of Odysseus on Ithaca. That was my long-term dream. But when you're 29 years old and you've never had an academic job and you get an offer at a place like Berkeley, and you get a chance to excavate at a site that has 3 ancient columns standing up, it's hard to say no. In fact, I couldn't say no. And here I am still 42 years later, at the same site, still working.
So when you originally took us through the original, kind of deal at Nemea,
right.
And this would have been in like 1996. I remember you said there were 3 columns, and you had, I think, just discovered that there had been like a hippodrome, if I remember, and you were really
there had to be, there had to be a hippodrome here because equestrian events were. Hello.
Yeah, we're here.
Wait a second, my phone is acting up. Okay, equestrian events were a part of the Nemean Games, as I'm sure you remember, John.
Yes.
So there had to be a hippodrome, and it was a question of figuring out where the possibilities were. And we began to find, yes, you're right, it was 96, 97, we began to find traces of it. It never has been fully uncovered, but the general location is clear. And the importance of it is that there's never been an ancient Greek horse race track, that has been fully uncovered. And unfortunately, I've retired, and I won't probably see the hippodrome here fully excavated, but I think I've been able to establish where it is, and the next generation knows where to start. At least I think they know where to start.
Well, for those of you guys listening at home, a hippodrome is actually a racetrack, and
horse race.
Horse race, yeah. So that's the horse race, and they actually had a massive track for that. So there was, I remember that was a huge, huge discovery, and something that stuck with me. I remember it was one of the first questions I asked you when I emailed you. I'm like, did you find any more of that? And you're like, unfortunately, no, we're not going down that direction. But I mean, for me as a rhetoric major, which was, really steeped in the classics, it was extremely exciting to not only see this other aspect, because there was such a huge, amount of emphasis put on not only training the physical aspect, especially of the Greeks, but also, the philosophy and the education. So, I mean, it was pretty cool to kind of not only go in and study all these, Greek philosophers and the rhetoricians, but also to see that not only that, but they were all great athletes, and they put a ton of emphasis on athletic prowess. So definitely a very exciting deal. So from 96.
John, I don't mean to stroke your ego, but it seems to me that the most important aspect of ancient Greek athletics was that it was only one half of what an ancient Greek was about. The other half was in the mind. And you came very close to exemplifying that.
Thank you, Professor. Yes, finally, here we are talking to somebody that knows me. See, these guys.
Maybe at 19.
Yeah, at 19.
Well, excuse me, but I over about almost 30 years of teaching ancient Greek athletics at Berkeley, I had a lot of student athletes in many different many different competitions, many different teams, and what have you. And I was a great fan of football, and I was always very partial to the football players that came in. And some of them were really outstanding students, and they exemplified that Greek ideal of the mind and the body. There were some who weren't very good in the mind, but John fit into the first category.
Would you elaborate on that a little bit when you talk about exemplifying the mind and the body? In terms of the mind, do you just mean interest in arts and things outside of like an athletic?
No. I mean knowledge. I mean an ability to think out problems. I mean, an ability to absorb facts, which is what I asked John to do in the history of Rome, the Roman topography class, but then to use them. And to take those facts and put them together and to draw conclusions from them. And I mean, the ancient Greek schoolroom was a part of the time a place where people sat and talked and discussed what they should do with their lives and how they should live their lives. And part of the time was where they went out and wrestled and boxed and ran and engaged in physical exercise. And that's what I'm after. I don't think that in America today we think in those terms so much that we should be trying to develop mind and body together. But sometimes, by accident or by whatever, good luck, it happens. And that, when that happens, that's wonderful.
Do you think that that intellect side is something that can make an athlete better?
Yes.
If it's developed.
I used to have great fun on Monday mornings when I would go into class and I'd been at the football game and I had watched some of my students playing, and I said, in the third quarter you held that guy and you didn't get called for it, and to watch the blush come over the face of that tackle or that guard who didn't know that I was watching that closely. But it turned them on. It got them excited. It got them interested. And I'm convinced that the best football players, and I think in other sports as well, are those who have physical skills and have practice and stuff, but also think it out and think through things and understand, whether intuitively or because of their experience, that there is a certain way that you are going to leverage your opponent. I mean, I shouldn't be talking about this. I'm not a specialist. John can talk about this better than I. But I think there's an intellectual aspect to it. And when you are standing in a huddle and the quarterback throws 25 numbers at you, and you have to pick out what number is the right number and what that means, and you have to memorize a playbook that has, God, I don't know, John, how many plays were in the playbook at Cal?
There's hundreds.
50, 100?
Yeah, there's hundreds of plays and hundreds of variations.
Yeah, exactly. But you have to be able to respond in a couple of seconds to that and know what your assignment is to do. That's physical implementation of a mental process.
Dr. Miller, why do you think that athletes have come so far away from that, especially with your understanding of ancient athletics? Do you think that there was almost a necessity for it at the time?
Any answer I give you is going to be prejudicial.
Sure.
But it seems to me that an athlete out on the field has a coaching staff, has a coach and a coaching staff. And I think that plays a huge role. Those people are teachers. And they need to take into account all of the aspects of the athlete, and they need to utilize them and actually to exploit them. And I think that there are times when coaches, frankly, are not smart enough to understand what they need to do with the student athlete, to get the best out of them. Excuse me, you're talking to a professor now, not to a coach.
Sure.
Well, some of the most insightful things that we've heard on this podcast in life is actually coming from people that are not necessarily in the field, that are observing things from the outside. And the reason I was so excited to get you on is that you have such a great understanding of competition athletics and really like the idea of competition from, thousands of years ago. And what's amazing is, and I remember sitting in your class drawing parallels between like today and realizing how much things had not changed. And always the one I think about is you had a whole deal on supplements. On supplements.
Okay, Wellborn, you get an A.
Well, no, but I like as I was telling Luke and Callie when about bringing you on, I'm like, we gotta not only ask him about the training in antiquity, what they did to get ready, but the supplements, the diet, and really things that I think would be amazing for people to hear, because it wasn't that different. I think like one guy consumed like massive amounts of like I think it was like bee pollen, and I'll let you talk about it because you obviously know.
Well, no, the ancient Greek athletics, and this is the joy that I have of studying ancient Greek athletics, because it evolved, and I can see over hundreds of years the evolution of what was going on with the competitions themselves and with the training for them. Whereas in the early days, it was just Joe Blow who was strong going out and beating up on the other guy. Then it became a question of being trained of how to beat up on the other guy. And then it became a question of how to get your body into shape to beat up on the other guy. And this, over the centuries, and we're talking about maybe 500 years of development, you suddenly have the diets that are expressly used for athletes. For example, in Greece, 600 years before Christ, nobody ate meat, or at least not regularly. On holidays, it was a rarity to have meat in your diet. But gradually it was understood that the protein that came out of meat is going to help your body strength. And so you suddenly have athletes, to the exclusion of the rest of society, getting a heavy protein meat diet. And this sets the athlete apart from the rest of society. You can draw your own modern conclusions from this. But what I'm trying to say is that the athlete who had originally just been Joe Blow, who went out and ran or wrestled, suddenly becomes a specialist. And with that specialty, he has to have his diet because his competitors have this sort of diet. At the Olympic Games, we know that they got into such training that there was what was called the 4-day cycle. And the theory was that if you trained slightly on day 1, and then more intensely on day 2, and more intensely on day 3, and then on day 4 you went to compete, you would be ready for competition. And if you were going through this over a period of weeks and months, you would have this 4-day cycle over and repeating itself. So you would be, I think, frankly, it was more psychological than physical, but it could have been physical, I can't say. But they were building up. So the officials at the Olympic Games banned it. They made the athletes come to Olympia a month before the time of the Games so they could check to make sure they were not doing the 4-day cycle. I mean, there was a lot of this sort of technique that was going on to try to win.
What were some of the supplements? And I remember there was a whole section in the class talking about not only supplements, and then didn't they ban certain supplements that certain people couldn't take certain things because it gave a competitive advantage?
That was again, like the 4-day cycle. It was also an issue of not allowing you to overeat meat, particularly meat. Meat was the big issue, there, so far as we know, as far as I know at any rate, there weren't drugs in the sense that we have them today, that you go into the pharmacy and buy things that can enhance your performance. But it was understood that there were certain foods that could enhance your performance, and there was always an attempt to stay ahead of the athlete so that he couldn't get an advantage out of what he was ingesting.
I have a question. What purpose was competition serving at the time? Was it entertainment-based? Was it...
Initially, it was competition for its own sake. You ran and wrestled and boxed so that you could prove that you were better than anybody else. Mm-hmm. And in our revival of the Nemean Games that we have here in the ancient stadium every 4 years, you can see that sort of attitude. That sort of, you get guys who are 80 years old, who are overweight, who go out and run because they think they can win. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole point. But they don't win. There's only one winner, but these guys have competed, and they've gotten into that competitive mode. But as time went by, and again, I stress the evolution of ancient Greek athletics, as time went by and as athletes became more specialized and became more attuned to diet, more attuned to training cycles, more frequently an athlete would have his own personal trainer who would go with him all around the world. as this goes on, the athlete does become an entertainer. And that was the joy of athletics in antiquity, and I think the joy of athletics today for the spectator. You don't know what the outcome is going to be.
I was just curious if they were ever compensated, and then if they were, did that...
Yeah.
You're also talking about
Let me talk about the cycle of the four games. Olympia, Delphi, Isthmia, and here at Nemea. Those were the crown games. And in theory, what you got as a winner, and have in mind, please, that there were no second place or no third place. You were a winner or you were a loser. End of story. For the winners, what they got here at Nemea was a crown of wild celery. What they got at Olympia was a crown of olive. There are these crown games, and all you have are these vegetable crowns on your head that one ancient cynic said were worth more for goats than they were for men. But when you went home, and when you went back to Athens, or hello,
yes, yeah,
when you went back to Athens or to your hometown, whatever Sparta, whatever it is, you would get a free meal at state expense for the rest of your life because you had won that crown. When you won a second crown, you would get a second free meal. And by the time you had won 4 of those crowns, which meant that you were a circuit winner, a grand slammer, you would have 4 free meals a day. How many free meals can you eat in a day? So the meals were translated into funds and money. So that the notion that we have today of ancient Greek athletics as being amateur athletics, meaning no money was involved, is wrong. Is completely wrong.
But
there was a lot of money involved.
But I'm trying to pull from previous knowledge, but wasn't that the transition between like and I forget what the Greek word is, it's like amateur or whatever it was, like the amateur, the non-pay, and then moving to the professional, which was for the pay, and like what was that just something that happened and evolved, or was that like a pretty distinct deal, or was it just happened through evolution?
No, it evolved, and I think I don't think there's a point in time where you can say this is when it happened, but it was evolving. And when the athlete is in a position where he can make a living from athletics, when it's possible for him to set himself up for life out of what he wins, his earnings, his money that come in from his victories, and he only gets paid if he wins. Then you've got a situation where people are going to get involved, and this is going on already. We talk about the classical period of the 5th century BC, but it was happening then already, and there's plenty of evidence for it. And then by the time you get to the period of Alexander the Great, you have stadia that are set up that no longer are simple grassy depressions. You start to have seats, and big seats for the spectators. In other words, the arrangements for the athletes don't change that much, but they change for the spectators. You guys are probably not old enough, but I remember a team called the Oakland Raiders, which became the Los Angeles Raiders, which became the Oakland Raiders. And why did that change go on? Because of the spectator facilities, because of the box seats, because of the luxury seats. So far as I know, the facilities for the athletes themselves didn't change that much. But this is what goes on in antiquity. You start out with no seats, a row of seats, a section of seats, the whole stadium filled with seats. And the athlete, at the same time, is getting separated from the crowd. He has his own locker room, his own entrance tunnel, and when he comes out on the track, it's a sense of theater. There's the appearance. I mean, John, you know, when you run out of the tunnel and the crowd sees the team coming out, that's exciting.
Yeah,
and there's a theatrical aspect to that.
With the I think the other good parallel is, did the games or did the original competitions start as like a precursor for training for like the military and for war times? And
well, now you've opened a big subject. This is often said that athletics in antiquity were training for war, but I don't agree with that because there are two kinds of athletics. There are the competitions that we have here at Nemea where it's a one-man event. You don't have team events. And the winner is the winner and everyone else is a loser. And I can't imagine how it's training for war to run a race with a helmet and a shield, but without an offensive weapon, without a spear or a sword. Whereas in the city-states, in Athens, in Sparta, in Corinth, you had team competitions. You had infantry drills. You had cavalry drills. You had young men being trained for the military specifically. And there were competitions there, too, but there were intramural competitions. They were not international competitions. I think they're two very different things that are going on in antiquity. And you've hit one of my hobby horses, because I really don't think that international athletic competitions in antiquity had anything to do with war. I think they had to do with people going out and running and showing that they were the best of their kind.
Was it, and it was always related to free individuals, like free citizens, like necessarily the slaves didn't compete, though.
Yes. You had to be a Greek person. You had to be Greek. You had to show that you were Greek. There were cases where athletes presented themselves for competition, and their rivals would say, he's not a Greek. And he would have to prove that he was Greek in order to be that. So that these, what I call international competitions, are international in the sense that they're all of the Greek city-states, but they're not bringing in people from other parts of the world. They're just the Greek world. But they are still the predecessor of the Olympics today.
But then we saw a huge transition. I remember you brushed on it briefly when you got to Rome, for example, where all of a sudden, like the gladiator games and that stuff became a competition and more like a fighting.
Yeah, that's purely entertainment.
But that was purely entertainment.
I don't know if it was entertainment for the gladiators or for the Christians or for the lions, but it was entertainment for the spectators, purely.
Yeah, and I remember you making the distinction between more like the Greeks were doing this more for the pure competition, whereas the Romans were more about.
Well, originally, yes. I'm not sure they were later on, but originally, yes. Yeah.
So we're. As you look back, what major parallels are you able to draw between, those original that we see today, or are there no parallels? I mean, what our Olympics have necessarily evolved into is so far removed.
There are parallels, but this one of the things that I've been doing in the last 20 years is the revival of the ancient games in the ancient stadium that I excavated. Anybody comes in, goes into the ancient locker room, takes off his or her clothes, puts on a white tunic, a chiton, and goes barefoot through the entrance tunnel out onto the track, puts toes into the same starting blocks that were there for the ancient Greeks, uses the same starting mechanism, and runs down the track. And these people are competing against one another and, to a certain extent, against themselves. Because that's part of the spirit of Greek athletics, is that you do your best against yourself, and whatever happens after that is what happens. But you have to exert yourself, you have to promote yourself, you have to push yourself to do your best. And what I see in our little games here is that sort of ideal. What I see, I'm sorry to say it, but I see increasingly in the Olympics, which theoretically should be exactly that, should be what the ancient Greeks were. I see more and more corporate involvement. I see more and more money involved, and I see that only the very best athletes, and they are good athletes, can compete. Whereas I would never have a chance running down the track. Sure, I can run down the track at Nemea, and okay, I lose, but I still have competed. But I wouldn't even get to compete in the Olympic Games today.
I have a quick question. So we, as a culture, have become it's become a spectator sort of involvement. I mean, we rely heavily as a culture on watching sports every weekend, and I'm just curious as to when it became more of a spectator sport, or the ancient athletics became more of a spectator-type experience, if other things were happening historically within that culture that drove people to want to either distract themselves with that or
why weren't you my student?
I don't know.
Listen, It's right a question that's right on. In the 5th century BC and the 6th century BC, when Greek athletics were evolving, and the spirit of competition and what have you was there, it was a competition between individual city-states. And you had the Athenians wanting to go out and beat the Spartans on the battlefield, but also at the Olympics, and also here at Nemea. It wasn't war, but there was a competitive spirit. At Berkeley, there's a place down the road called Stanford, and that's the place you really want to beat, and you do it on the field in competitions. And it's not just football; it's a lot of other sports as well. And that rivalry between city-states was very high. By the time we get to the period of Alexander the Great, the power, the importance of the individual city-states has subsided tremendously. And there is a big ethnic, nationalistic challenge for the Greeks against the Persians, against whatever it might be. And the individual city-states diminish in their importance. And with that diminution comes the evolvement, I think, of Greek athletics as entertainment, and where the athletes and the spectators are separate. But that doesn't, I hope I made myself clear, but there's a political aspect, a historical political aspect to the development of Greek athletics into an entertainment sport.
So most of the research that you were able to do on a lot of this stuff, and like a lot of just the research on the athletes and the different events and whatnot, I remember you pulled from everything from I remember just seeing vast pictures of different vases and drawings and whatnot.
Yes.
I cannot remember for the life of me, but I always remembered that there was somebody who was the greatest athlete at the time, and there was there one individual that went out and won just about everything and was known as the greatest athlete in antiquity?
Well, there are different people at different times. One of the most important was a fellow from the island of Thasos in northern Greece, just across the way from Amphipolis. If you've heard about what's been going on in Amphipolis lately, this guy Theogenes was his name. We're told in one source he won 1,400 victories. And these were victories both at Olympia and Delphi and Isthmia and Nemea, but also at other local games, because there were local games that had a money prize. And this is 480 BC, just as the classical period is beginning. He's going out and beating everybody, every place. When he retires, finally, he has amassed, I estimate, something like $25 to $30 million. That's, you can't always be sure about currency equivalents, but he has amassed a lot of money. He goes into politics, and after he dies, the people of Thasos have put up a statue of him in the marketplace in the Agora, and his statue is there, and one of his political opponents, who was never successful against him, comes in and starts to pound on the statue. Theogenes himself is dead, but this opponent starts to pound on the statue, and the statue falls over and kills him.
Victory.
And so the people of Thasos say, "Oh my God, this is a bad thing. The statue is guilty of murder. We have to get rid of the statue." So they take the statue out and throw it into the sea.
That's funny. Even in
2 years, 3 years, 4 years go by. There's famine. There is a shortfall of food. And the people of Thasos go to Delphi and say, "What do we do about this?" And they say, "You have forgotten your great Diogenes, your great athletic hero." And they say, "Oh my God," and they go back, and what do we do? What do they do? And fortunately, some fishermen out in the sea pulled up the statue, and they set the statue back up, but they created a hero shrine to this guy, this athletic hero, who ceases to be human. At least he's not entirely human. He's partly divine, because his statue, and through the statue, he has been able to inflict this wound, not only the guy who knock the statue down, but on all of the people of Assos. This story belongs in the 5th century BC, 400 years before Christ and more. There is at the island of Assos an altar which is dedicated to Theogenes that dates to the 1st century after Christ, 500 years later. And it says that if you want to do proper things, you should put a drachma in the till, and there's a little slot that you can express your worship for the god, demigod, athlete, Theogenes.
Huh. Was there at the time, is there a baseball card equivalent to athletes, like an homage to athletes, pottery?
There is. Didn't they have like coins with their images that like they traded?
Yes. So, for special ones. Yeah. Indeed.
It's so
I
funny.
mean,
all these things keep flooding back to me as she's asking these questions. I'm like, wait a minute, I've heard this before.
Yeah, I'm not very innovative, am I?
Dr. Miller, was it exclusively males who competed?
Theoretically, it was exclusively male, and we know that at the games themselves, only males were allowed to be there, with the exception of a priestess here and there. However, there were games for women, separate games for women at a different time of the year, at Olympia and elsewhere. And I suspect here at Nemea, though we don't have the evidence for it here, but in different parts of Greece, we hear of women competing in athletic events. We don't hear very much about it. And what I used to do, and John may remember this, what I used to do is on the day that I lectured about women's athletics in antiquity, I would take the San Francisco Chronicle and take the sports page and count up how many square inches there were devoted to men's athletics, how many to horse races, how many to advertisements, and how many to women's athletics. And the women's athletics were never more than 2% of the whole of the San Francisco Chronicle sports page. And that doesn't mean that there weren't women's athletics. It doesn't mean that women were not out running and racing and what have you. It just meant that the press didn't cover them very well. And the same thing comes to us from antiquity. We don't have the press coverage. Don't forget that all the people we have writing for us, with very few exceptions, are male. So they write about men's athletics. They don't write about women's athletics. So there's a social prejudice that's going on.
Professor, tell Kelly what the typical dress was for the competition.
For the male?
Yes.
Oil.
So offline, I was emailing Professor, and I asked him, I was like, Professor, are you still rolling around with your stalangi? Which I totally butchered the spelling of it, but a stalangi was like a long stick that kind of had a curve to it and had a sharp edge.
Yeah, John, the image that may be the best, if you go to a fancy restaurant and the waiter comes around after you've eaten and spilled breadcrumbs all over the place, he has a scraper. It has a scraper that he scrapes up the breadcrumbs. It was something like that John's talking about.
So what
scrapes off the oil and
they would cover themselves in olive oil,
sweat, and
they would compete naked, and then when they were done, they would stalangi themselves, and then they would keep the remnants, like what they would stalangi off, and you know what they would use it for?
Cooking.
No, they would make it into colognes and potions and stuff, and women would buy it at the
store. Yeah. It was a salve. Right. It was complete recycling.
Yeah.
Dr. Miller, were most of the athletes employed outside of just being athletes? I mean, were they tradesmen?
Initially, in the early days, yes, they had their own. I mean, we hear about the guy who was a farmer. We hear about the guy who was a philosopher. We hear about this. But as time goes on, as they get into athletics, around the time of Alexander the Great, around 330 years before Christ, by that time, athletes has become a profession, and it's a way you're going to make your living. And it becomes a very highly competitive but very limited sport. It's not for the whole society. It's not for any Tom, Dick, and Harry to run in. It's just for the guys who are really good at it.
Doesn't it kind of go against what the original idea was, that this idea, and I always remember that.
Well, John, excuse me, let me interrupt you for a second. I'm not sure the Greeks ever had an idea about it. I think it was there, and they developed it, and they ran. They competed in the nude, as you said, and I think, frankly, that's where democracy comes from, is the idea of competitions in the nude, where everybody's all the same. I mean, you're not all the same because some are tall and short, some are fast and slow, but the notion is that everybody is more or less equal. That the democratic idea, I don't think was formulated beforehand. I think it evolved. I don't think that somebody came down and said, okay, we're going to have guys run the nude because it's good for blah, 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 blah. That's what it was. It just developed.
Right.
And then it develops into what we would recognize today as professional athletics.
I always thought that there was this idea or this notion, or more importantly, like this idea that you had to be kind of well-balanced, that you had to be a musician, a singer, a dancer.
Yes, you're right. You're right. But the first time we hear of that idea is in the 4th century before Christ. It's not in the 6th or the 5th century. It's in the 4th century before Christ. When you get a Plato who was a wrestler, and probably, no, we're told that he won in games. Plato was a Nemean victor, and we're also told, although people don't believe it, that he was an Olympic victor. But it's Plato, more than any other person, says, you need to develop your mind and your body together. And it was an idea, it was an ideal, but it's an ideal that evolves. It comes into being after the fact, that you describe something that has already been there, not a predisposition, at least so far as we can tell from the ancient evidence we have.
Yeah, I must have been getting that confused, just because I remember actually it was Plato, and I do remember reading about being balanced, and I for myself having not only read that, but I always remember people always ask me, I was like, you need to read that. Just being so one-sided and so focused on just one thing, doesn't necessarily meet the demands and just only leads to being.
Well, I mean, there's also the fact that if you're focused on just one thing, it gets boring.
Yeah, that does happen. So.
To kind of bring it full circle, I'm curious if you can touch on, I know we were talking about the athlete mind before, but are there any other character traits that you would say are relatively unique to ancient athletics that maybe aren't so much exhibited now, but we would all benefit from?
Well, obviously, most modern athletes don't want to run around in the nude or put oil on their bodies. But beyond that, at least initially, athletics were important, but they were not important to the exclusion of all else. Whereas I think nowadays, and John is in a position to speak to this, I have a notion that when a professional athlete is competing professionally, he is expected to pay attention only to the competition, to the game, to the team, to the whatever he's up to, and forget reading Plato.
Yeah, there's definitely a feeling that.
Am I wrong, John? Tell me.
No, you're 100% right. I mean, there, even though, I mean, it's kind of a bullshit deal and just kind of lip service. I mean, you go to a place like Berkeley, which, I tell these guys every day is probably one of the finest academic institutions on the planet, and even at a place like Berkeley, you're expected to not only go out and go to class, get good grades, but really you're there to play football. And the goal of most of the academic.
I used to have real problems with on occasion. I mean, the coaches during the 30 years I was there were different coaches, and some of them were really clued in, and they would come to class and really get involved and very supportive of what I was trying to do. But usually they came and beat on my head and say, "Why didn't you pass this guy? I need him."
Yeah. No, I do. Well, you remember I graduated in 4 years, and then my last year I worked on my master's in education, and I was a...
Yes, right, I remember.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you wrote me actually a recommendation for that, and...
yes.
So, yeah, actually, I do...
Do you regret that?
No, it was one of the most... the only thing I regret was not finishing my thesis, and by the time I went back to go do it, they, the professor who was in charge of my program, and I cannot remember his name, had passed away.
Yeah, but we all retire, don't we?
Yeah, and then Derek Van Reen took it over, and he wasn't as interested in letting me go back and do it. So at that point, I was kind of a little bummed.
Yeah,
but
I'm sorry for that.
His name was Herb Simons, I believe is what the professor's name was. But there was this attitude that, the guys were there, and I remember even being a young graduate student and having young football players in my class, and I remember giving them an assignment on the Thursday, and it was a Tuesday-Thursday class. and I expected to have this assignment done on next Tuesday, and the young football players came in to me and told me that they couldn't get the assignment done because of the football game. And mind you, I'm in my last year. I'm a All-American, getting ready to go play in the NFL, started and played. These were all redshirt freshmen that did not play. And they came in and they tried to use the excuse of there was a football game. And I remember looking at them and being like, you didn't play, I played. And they were like, well, yeah, we had this football game, and how was I going to get this done? I remember.
And where did they get that? Did they make it up themselves, or were they encouraged?
I think I think they're just young and lazy. And I remember giving them F's on the assignment, and then getting a phone, and then seeing my academic advisor and coach, and being like, "What the fuck? Why are you giving these guys F's?" And I explained it to them. I'm like, dude, I'm not going to perpetuate this bullshit, because when I came in here, I was thrown into a class of 800 people, and I was expected to go out and do my work. There was none of this hand-holding, which is depressing, because years later I learned that there were people, even at Berkeley, that were committing academic fraud, getting their papers written. And I was like, where the hell?
I know they were.
Where the hell was that when I was there? I was like, I didn't get any of that stuff, so I was kind of a little pissed off.
Well, John, it went from place to place and time to time and person to person. Let me tell you a story. There was I gave an assignment for writing a paper, which is the same assignment that I've given in the past, to a class, and there were 2 basketball players in the class, and their names were next to each other in the list of students. And the papers came in, and I read one after another, and I came to this one guy's, and there was this paper, and it sounded sort of familiar. And then I went to the next guy's, and it was not only the same paper, it was typed on the same printer, printed out on the same printer, that had the same problems, the missing letters here and the skip spaces there. I mean, it was clearly completely plagiarized. And boy, did I get into trouble with the coaching staff.
Well, I think, and if memory serves.
But let me just finish the story, because one of the 2 guys disappeared, but the other guy came back and took more classes with me. He was never an A student, but he was not a bad B student, and I was very proud of him. He did something with himself in the end.
Well, as I remember in our class, I remember there were a couple, I can't remember if they were football players or basketball players, that I think pulled some bullshit similar to that, and I remember hearing about it, and I think instead of you going off the handle and, slapping with academic fraud and getting them burned at the stake, I remember you going in and actually working with them and making them pay their debt, which I always respected, which I always thought was
No, they had to come in and do work. I mean, it was more work for me, too. But what the hell? I mean, am I going to just throw them out on the street? No, come in and get your brain together and make something of yourself.
Did you feel that...
I'm sorry, John. I don't mean to drink. Hey, John, what are you doing now? Where are you?
Where am I?
Yeah, where I don't even know. I mean, am I talking to California or Illinois or?
No. You're talking to California. I live in Newport Beach, California, and I'm married. I have twin daughters that are 3 years old. And
wow.
Yeah. So after playing for
good for you.
10 years in the NFL, I retired, and I was literally on my couch having. The reason I retired is I hurt my knee in New England and came home and had knee surgery. And while I was sitting on the couch trying to ponder what I was going to do with my life, I had actually had filled out all the applications and started studying for my LSATs and was going to go to law school because I had applied for that Adrian Cragen scholarship after Berkeley, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to law school at Bolt Hall, but I didn't think I'd go play in the NFL for 10 years, and so that had kind of gone past, and so I was looking at some local schools and started going down that road, and I got a phone call from, you obviously heard of CrossFit, the training style CrossFit.
Yeah.
So CrossFit.com, and the guy who started CrossFit, a guy named Greg Glassman, called me on the phone and asked me if I would teach what I had done in my training and what I'd learned to the CrossFit.
So you taught. You're teaching.
Yeah, so I teach, and we teach me and
good for you.
My coaches.
Good for you. It's a worthy profession, let me tell you.
It is, and we travel and teach seminars based on the training style that I used to play in the NFL, and we started a website that year, and we get thousands of hits, and then a couple years ago I started my own brand, which is Power Athlete, and we have not only this podcast, but we do events, and we have a paid back end where we do training and coaching and really help people kind of see through the bullshit, because as you very well know, I mean, there's so much noise, there's so much worthlessness in the world that we just try to offer, like, hey, this is a stripped down, no holds barred, no bullshit style of training, style of eating, just style of just really living. And this podcast is really been pretty awesome extension, because I get to reconnect with a lot of the people from my past and people that I really count as major figures and some of the most influential people in my own life. And, that's why I was so excited to get you on, because not only was that an influential class, but I always
you're sweet. You say that to all the guys up there.
I do. But to this day, and I tell people this whenever they ask me, like, was school hard? And I'm like, for the most part, I really enjoyed it. The only class that I busted my ass and was one of the most difficult classes was this class on Roman monuments.
Yeah, well, you just have to. Have you been to Rome since then?
No, I haven't, and it is on my bucket list.
Well, John, you got to use this stuff. You got to take your wife and your kids and go show them Rome.
Yeah, I will. My daughters are 3 years old, so they're getting to an age where they should appreciate it. But I'm going to imagine me dragging my 3-year-olds or my twin daughters all over Rome, showing them.
Yeah, well, wait a couple of years. Yeah.
What was the big? It was like a manhole cover that had a mouth, and when people put their hand in it, they tell the truth.
Oh yes, it's on a church near the Forum Boarium in Rome. I haven't taught that course in a long time. Probably you were the last class I taught it in. The Boca Veritas, I think it was called, and if you put your hand in and told a lie, you lost your hand.
Yes, and it was
in the mouth.
And I remember it had a mouth and it looked like waves, and they had put it up on a wall, but originally it was supposed to be.
That's right.
And then the other one is when so my wife and I find out that she's pregnant. We go to the doctor, and you see the 2 blinking little lights in there. We realized we had twins, and I all of a sudden went back in my mind and remembered the story of Castor and Pollux and the Forum, and you remember we went through that whole story.
Yes.
And I had visions of I was going to have twin boys, and if they were twin boys, I was going to name them Castor and Pollux. And it was going to be this great thing, and then I ended up with twin daughters, so I figured those names wouldn't be good, so I picked different ones.
And what did you call them?
They're actually Irish names. Killian.
What?
Irish names. Killian is my one daughter, and that's the family name of my wife. And then I named my other daughter Jameson.
What? Second?
Jameson. So
Jameson?
Jameson, like the whiskey.
Oh.
So
is she going to grow up thinking that she's associated with whiskey?
No. What happened is we have a family name. My wife's mother's maiden name is Killian, so we chose that as a name, and then I needed another Irish name. Right. And I had been in Dublin about 2 weeks before the girls were born for work, and everywhere you go, everything's Guinness and Jameson. And so when I came up, when the babies were born, kind of unexpectedly, when they came in to ask about the names, it was that's all I could pull out of my hat at that stressful moment. So we went with Jameson and Killian. But
never mind. It'll be a name that will draw attention.
Speaking of names, Dr. Miller, I was reading on your website that you are, in quotations, referred to as Indiana Jones. Like, that's a nickname. Is that true?
Indiana Miller.
Stephen Indiana Miller.
Yeah, well, let me explain a little bit about that. I was born and raised in Indiana, so it's a legitimate name. But in 1976, my third year of teaching at Berkeley, a former student who had graduated the year before came into my office hours, and he said, "Would you mind giving me some information about how you became an archaeologist and what it's like to be an archaeologist and so on and so forth." And we went on for about an hour. He was taking all kinds of notes, and I said, "What are you doing there? What's this all about?" He said, "I got a job with somebody named Spielberg, and we're going to do some movies, a movie about an archaeologist. I just wanted background information." Well, I never went and saw those movies until, 10 years later. They were old movies by the time I saw them, all the Indiana Jones movies. But when I went to see the first one, and there was Indiana Jones, I said, "Wait a minute. This kid take my name and as well as the background. So I don't know. But I on a chance, I couldn't remember his name. But on a chance, I wrote to Spielberg, and I never got an answer, so I don't think I'm going to get royalties. But anyway.
I cannot believe that. That's the best story I have ever heard. And, of course, they stole your name. It's not even a question. That's amazing. That's so neat.
Well, I don't know. But it's fun to think about it.
Yeah, and, that's fantastic.
Wow, so you started at Berkeley in 71 or 73, you said?
73. The fall of 73 was my... 71, I was hired. But the job didn't start until the fall of 73.
And then, man, that's, having gone to Berkeley in the 90s, even going back now, I can't imagine what the landscape and the attitude and everything was like in the 70s at Berkeley. I mean, that would be kind of the post-revolutionary days where, it was got to be just
Well, I was scared. When I went to Berkeley, I almost took a plane to Los Angeles because I didn't know the topography of California very well at all, really. And I went to Berkeley and I heard all these stories about the free speech movement and about students sitting in professors' offices and so on and so forth. And my first year there, I was teaching a class in Latin, and I had 6 or 8 students in, I don't remember, not a large class. And there was a student in the class who was really sort of a hippie in the sense that he was unwashed, unclothed, unshaven, sometimes barefoot, what have you. But he was not a bad student. He knew some Latin, and we got on. About the 4th week or so, I had decided this guy was a hippie. He was a terrible guy. He was going to, sit in my class. He was going to come and rip the stuff out of my office and what have you. And about the 4th week or so, he came in my office hours, and he said, "Professor Miller, I've come to say I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave school. I can't make it financially. I've been pumping gas in the evenings and working in the supermarkets in the afternoons, and I'm not going to be able to make it." And he said, I'm sorry, I just wanted to tell you that I enjoyed the class and hope that someday I can come back to school. My heart broke. What was I to judge him? To say this guy was a nasty guy, a bad guy. Okay, he was unwashed and poorly clothed and what have you, but that was a function of his status in society, not of the way he was operating. And it was a huge lesson to me about how Berkeley operates. It's there for everybody.
Well, Dr. Miller, can you tell us a little bit about Wabash?
Wabash.
Wabash, yes, Wabash. Wabash is maybe that's why I'm an archaeologist, because Wabash is an old-fashioned throwback school. It was founded not quite 200 years ago. It is only for men, or you might call them boys, but anyway. And you have to take 2 years of a foreign language. That's where I started ancient Greek. You have to take a year of history, a semester of physics, a semester of biology. There are all these requirements. And the notion is that you don't decide what your major is until you're a junior. You go and taste a little of this and taste a little of that and get a rounded thing. And for me, it was wonderful because it opened windows to me for all around the world. It has a reputation of being sort of what should I say? A place where guys go and drink beer and go out and play games of different kinds. But you don't come out of Wabash College very well polished socially because you've never seen a girl. But you come out knowing a fair amount of history and physics and chemistry and religion and what have you. So it fit me. It doesn't fit everybody, but it fit me very well.
Is it still in operation?
Oh yeah! Oh! Are you kidding me?
I don't know.
And you know they're very good at fundraising, and most of us. I mean, in my graduating class at Wabash College, there were I'm trying to think now, 80,
Wow.
100. I mean, very small, very small. At the time, I think there were 600 undergraduates altogether, but some of those were freshmen who flunked out or left because they wanted to see girls. And so it was a very small school. It's still less than 1,000. But there's something special about it. I mean, I've never been in a monastery, and I don't think that Warriors qualifies for monastic life, but there was a sort of concentration of intellectual activity and physical activity at the same time for 5 days a week. And then you went out and got a keg of beer.
Living the dream, as we call it. That sounds like you have some pretty fond memories. It's like a perpetual
very much so. Very much so.
Professor, really the only thing I wanted to know is, so what are you doing now? I know you're in Nemea. Like, what does your day look like? Are you still doing archaeological work? Are you writing? Are you teaching? Like, what are you doing?
I'm doing a lot of different things. I'm still not bored. The major thing that I'm going through right now has to do with the revival of the games, and I'm just this afternoon I was able to send in all of the articles for this year's newsletter that goes out to the members of the Nemean Games, a member of the Society for Nemean Games. We have staged these games 5 times, starting in 1996. In the last games in 2012. We had over 1,000 people come to run from 87 different countries. They go in clusters of 12 because the ancient starting line has 12 places on it, 12 lanes. And they're sorted out by age and by gender. They go into the locker room and they take off their clothes, they put on a tunic, they go barefoot through the entrance tunnel, which is over 100 feet in length, and they really get transformed into ancient Greeks for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes. And they are touching ancient Greek soil, and they get a sense of what it must have been like to be an ancient Greek running down the track. They're not doing it in the nude, which would have been perfectly authentic, but they are doing it in uniforms, I mean, in these white tunics that are all the same for everybody, so that the sense of the uniform of nudity, which is a leveler, which is an equator between people, is there, and that exists. Anyway, we have, I think it's about 1,200 members now in our society. They're scattered. They're in 18 different countries around the world. And this time of the year, we send out a newsletter of what we've been doing for the last 12 months. And an invitation to the General Assembly, which is always in early January. A lot of our people can't come. I mean, they're located in other parts of the world. And a lot of them in California, actually. And also a reminder to pay their dues. So that takes up a large part of my time. We've also had a problem the last few months because of the economic crisis here in Greece. There is a real danger that the museum and the site is going to be closed down because the state doesn't have the money to pay for guards. And our society, with the help of other people, has been paying for guards for nearly 6 months now, and we're just about exhausted. So we'll see what happens, but I'm very worried about the future of that. I also do writing on articles, and just today, this morning, a former graduate student who is co-authoring the next major volume sent in his manuscript with his catalog, and so I'm going to have to start going through that and play editor with those materials. And I have a garden and a dog and a wife.
Well, you certainly are busy.
Wow.
No, I'm not bored. I'm not bored.
So when did you move full time to Greece?
Well, I retired from Berkeley in 2004. That was my last year. I mean, I went back and taught 2 semesters after that, but that was a sort of an ad hoc basis. But in December 2004, I retired, and so we started building a home here. This is a place that I have my books and and where we live on basically a year-round basis. We always go back to California for a couple of months in the winter to see family and friends, doctors, pay taxes, all those wonderful things. But basically, life is here in this little village, and over the years, there are a lot of friends here, people with whom I have shared experiences of different kinds, and it's home. It's not quite like Indiana, but it approaches what I grew up with.
Doc, is there a place that if someone wanted to make some sort of donation to help support the Nemean Games, is there a place where they can do that?
Oh, yes. How nice of you to ask. If you go onto the website, www.nemeangames, one word, nemeangames.org, there is a place where you can, there's lots of different information on the website about the past games and the plans for the future, so on and so forth. But there's also a place where it says, I think, join or help and join. I can't remember exactly what the rubric is, but there's a place there where people can go and sign up. And it's also a place where they can go and sign up to come and run in 2016. Our next games will be on June the 11th of 2016, and people are already starting to get excited. And we've got 5 or 6 people already signed up for the games for that year.
That's great.
That's awesome.
Well, thank you so much for being such a wealth of knowledge and hopefully sparking some of our own intellect as we are all athletes, but I'm sure we can, always gain a little bit from speaking with someone who is obviously a lot smarter than we are.
No, that's not true. That's not true. I know some things you don't know, and you know some things that I don't know. And when we get together, we trade them. Unfortunately, in this venue, as we're talking on the telephone long distance, and you're talking with an old man who can't really run anymore, it's sort of one-sided. But there was a time when I was out running and competing. There was a time when Plato went out and ran and competed. And I don't mean to cast myself in Plato's form, but don't be afraid to be smart.
Well, thank you so much. I know probably for John this was also a really special conversation. He definitely
and for me,
he built this up quite a bit to us. I know he is a big admirer of your work. So
yeah, thank you, Professor. I appreciate you taking the time. And,
well, John, you were one of my best students in a funny way, not just intellectually, but because you combined what I've been talking about, mind and body.
Thank you, Professor. That's a big compliment. I thank you very much.
Well,
it's deserved.
Unless there's anything else you wanna plug out there for either your website or if there's any other event or educational information that you think people should reach out with, go for it. If there's anything you want to talk about.
The only thing I would mention is that our society here in Nemea, in addition to having the revival of the games, is starting a school of ancient Greek athletics. And if you look at the schedule of that school, John would understand very well. It's the book on ancient Greek athletics that I wrote that evolved from the class that John was a part of on athletics. But in addition to that, what we're hoping to do is have a program set up where a local high school teacher can bring students for a day, where a university from the United States can bring students for 3 days or a week and study athletics, go out in the ancient track, throw an ancient discus, throw an ancient javelin, run down the track in your bare feet or maybe bare altogether if we can handle that. And in addition to that, we're hoping, and these are big dreams, I know, but we're hoping to build a replica of the building, which we have the foundations of an ancient building here at Nemea, where the athletes stayed when they came to train for the games. We want to build a replica of that a few hundred yards away, outside the archaeological zone, where students will come and go into rooms with ancient furniture and with ancient equipment, ancient discuses and what have you, and live for a few hours, a few days, a week, like ancient Greek athletes. And we'll see if we can carry that off. I don't know. The economic situation is not very good, but anyway, that's our hope right now, that we're sort of pushing in the back of our minds.
Well, that would be a really amazing experience. That sounds like an
I think so.
project.
I think so. And I have to say that one of the reasons I'd like to see it happen is so I could experience it.
Yeah.
So,
Selfishly, I think it's great. That's awesome. Well, John, anything else?
No, it's been great. I thank you, Professor, for taking your time, and I'm just glad that.
well, thank you, John.
The people on the podcast.
It's been a pleasure for me. You make me feel 10 years younger.
Well, what are you talking about? You're way younger than I thought you were. I thought you were in your early 40s, early 50s. So I guess at Indiana Jones.
Oh yeah, well I tried to make you think that. I'm glad I succeeded.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Take care of yourself, Doc. Thank you again.
Thank you. You too.
All right.
Come and see us at Nemea.
Okay, we'll do.
For sure. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Okay.